Hello, my name is Amanda Garner, and I will be discussing the performance of Dynamo Footwear from year 10 to year 20 in the business simulation game. Financial performance, year 10 to year 20. The first financial metric I will review is Dynamo Footwear's annual total revenues. In this chart, wholesale sales are shown in gray, internet sales in yellow, and private label sales are shown in brown, with each bar totaling to our total revenue each year. Despite a slight downturn in years 16 and 17, total revenues grew each year and were expected to continue this growth trend if the simulation continued. Here you can see the annual earnings per share for Dynamo Footwear. You can see our strategy of increasing net income and repurchasing stock worked for Dynamo as we jumped from an EPS of $3.80 in year 17 to an EPS of $11.78 in year 20. Using this strategy, we would have continued to increase our annual earnings per share as the simulation progressed. Dynamo Footwear's annual return on equity investment had a more meandering path than our EPS or total revenues. We struggled to regain our initial high percentage of 26.5% in year 11, but as you can see, in year 18 we jumped back up to 18.9% and finished the simulation at 23.5%. We expected to continue this upward trend. The simulation began with a B credit rating, and Dynamo quickly jumped to an A credit rating in year 11. By year 14, we had an A+ credit rating and maintained that excellent rating until the simulation ended in year 20. Here we have the annual year-end stock price for Dynamo Footwear. As you can see, with our expansion efforts into Latin America after year 15 and our stock repurchases, our stock price more than tripled from year 17 to year 18 and continued to jump up in years 19 and 20. Our continued efforts would likely have seen even higher stock prices in years 21 and 22. The final financial metric I would like to review is Dynamo's annual image rating. We had a few dips in our image rating through the years, but quickly addressed those issues and worked to bring those ratings back up. We ended year 20 at a slight decline from 82 to 81 and would have changed the percentages of standard and superior materials as well as our enhanced styling features to work to get that rating up higher for year 21. Dynamo Footwear certainly had plans in place to further grow our company should the simulation have continued. We would have continued to see upward trends in our earnings per share and returns on equity investments as we continued to increase our revenues and net income and reduce the number of shares outstanding. By changing the percentage makeup of our shoes and updating the features, we estimate higher image ratings, and all of these efforts would have led to ongoing rises in stock prices. Strategic vision. After reviewing the player's guide for the business simulation game, I decided on a strategy that I felt would put Dynamo Footwear in the top half of the market. According to the guide, most consumers would be content with a standard shoe with minimum frills. So Dynamo would produce an average product sold at an average price. I know it sounds strange to admit our policy was to produce a middle-of-the-line product, but the bell curve is highest in the middle, and I hope to grab a large portion of the market by never being the most expensive or the most flashy product for sale. The second decision I made was to expand conservatively. The market demand was not growing fast enough to require rapid expansion. I knew my competitors would be selling stock and taking out loans to build factories in Europe and Latin America, so I decided to let them take that financial risk alone. I did not expand for the first few years, and when I did, I added on to my existing factories in North America and Asia because it was cheaper to expand the existing factories than to build new. Cutting production costs was an important component of my strategic plan. In the early years, I cut fringe benefits for employees, raised the ratio of workers to supervisors, cut raises for supervisors, refused to bid for celebrity endorsements, paid attention to currency exchange rates and shipping costs to maximize my profits by shipping primarily where the rates would benefit me more or at least hurt me less. And I also heavily invested in private label production. Private label shoes allowed me to spread the fixed cost of production along a wider range of product, thus reducing the individual per pair cost. And because the market demand was not high enough to cover all of the branded production, I made sure to only produce enough branded footwear each year to meet my projected demand for that year. This allowed me to avoid costs of storing too much inventory and also helped me to avoid the image rating penalty for carrying outdated stock. There was one area where I was unwilling to be conservative and cut costs, and that was in Dynamo's corporate responsibility measures. I tried to forego the environmental and ethical extras, but in the end, I couldn't omit these measures. I know that I could have saved money by not using recycled packaging or paying for my employees to have a cafeteria or a daycare center or making sure that we had a supplier code of conduct, but I personally believe that corporations have a duty to act as responsible citizens in their communities, and so Dynamo had to have an ethical and environmental goal on top of their financial goals. This belief is also why my regular employees continue to receive raises each year, despite management only receiving raises when the company did well. And finally, Dynamo adopted a conservative spending strategy. Dynamo's revenues would need to cover all of its costs, and that includes expansion costs. And with 20,000 shares of stock outstanding at the beginning, I was unwilling to add more shares to the market. And I didn't want to take out bank loans, even if Dynamo had an exceptional credit rating, unless it was absolutely necessary to expand or build new factories. As we have seen from my financial review, my original strategy worked for a little while. But as Dynamo held off on expansion, competitors claimed more and more market share and the revenues that come with that. My company was slipping in the rankings. So between years 14 and year 15, I sat down, reviewed the competitive reports to see where we needed to change, and restructured Dynamo's strategic plan. We continued to reduce costs where we could by producing private label footwear to help spread fixed costs for manufacturing. In addition, we continued to uphold the ethical, environmental, and social responsibility efforts Dynamo Footwear had at its core values. However, Dynamo began to expand. We built a new factory in Latin America to become a high-quality, average-cost product in that market. And shipping to Latin America had been an expense plaguing Dynamo for several years, and the Latin American market was expected to grow faster than the European market, which is why we chose that location. We also changed up our production mix, altering the percentages for standard and superior materials, and funding more enhanced styling and features to raise our image rating and our SQ rating. And these changes helped our image rating and our projected demand. And finally, we changed our marketing funding. Dynamo was not going to use celebrity endorsements, so we had to spend our marketing dollars elsewhere. We decided to invest in internet and wholesale marketing efforts, as well as providing free shipping and mail-in rebates to make our shoes and our products more desirable. And as you have seen from the graphs, Dynamo's new efforts positively impacted our numbers, and we began to see that growth again that we had seen really early on. If the simulation had continued, we would have expanded again in Europe and built a factory there, likely in year 22, with production beginning there in year 23. Competitive strategies. Dynamo's strategy for the internet market largely remained the same from year 11 to year 20. In order to keep our prices competitive without becoming a threat to our wholesale retailers, Dynamo priced their internet products exactly 40% higher than the wholesale retailer price. In addition, our search engine advertising stayed consistent throughout the 10-year period, only rising slightly over time. Finally, we did not initially offer free shipping to customers. However, Dynamo began offering free shipping to entice buyers, beginning in the Asia-Pacific region and expanding to North America and then Latin America. Dynamo's strategy was a slow but steady plan for wholesale. The price to retailers gradually increased, brand advertising gradually increased. We started with small mail-in rebate amounts and gradually increased those until it was up to $8. Delivery times for products to stores gradually shortened to 2 weeks instead of the original 4 weeks, and finally, our retailer support spending remained consistent throughout the stimulation. Dynamo's strategy for the private label market was simple. We worked to maintain an SQ rating that was always higher than the minimum required to bid. Also, we produced as many private label pairs after branded production as we could. Dynamo sold private label pairs largely in the regions they were produced. This meant that we missed out on Europe almost entirely because we did not have a factory there, but made money in North America, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. Finally, we priced our private label pairs competitively. We priced it high enough to cover production costs and make a small profit, but we undercut other companies who were trying to price high. Production strategies. The only additional factory we built was in Latin America, preferring instead to add on to our already existing facilities in North America and Asia Pacific. When we expanded to Latin America, Dynamo chose it over Europe because the market demand was expected to be higher, also because the shipping and currency exchange rates often demanded a factory in Latin America over Europe. Dynamo consistently used overtime to increase our production, often solely for private label production. And finally, we invested in 100% new equipment in order to increase the quality and consistency of our production. As you can see, our production workers received a 1% raise each year, regardless of how the company did. They also received incentive pay per each non-rejected pair, and this did vary across the geographic regions. Our North American workers received $1 per each non-rejected pair, while our Latin American and Asia Pacific workers received only 75 cents per each non-rejected pair. Universally across the regions, we did pay $600 for employees to receive best practices training. We also funded cafeterias and on-site childcare facilities at each one of our factories, and Dynamo funded improved ventilation, lighting, and safety measures to ensure that we had the best workers who were happy and safe while they were on the job. Our supervisory staff only received raises after successful years, and those were 1% raises. And we also reduced the amount of supervisory staff needed to reduce the cost of supervisory salaries. We turned it into 50 production workers per supervisor instead of the normal 40 production workers per supervisor. And we never changed that number throughout the simulation. Finance strategies. Dynamo Footwear's financial strategies were admittedly conservative, and I blame this on my accounting background. To begin, Dynamo did not pay any dividends after year 11 because I wanted Dynamo's revenues to cover our production costs and future expansion costs. It was imperative that we not pay out dividends to our investors. And while I intended this to be a temporary measure, it became the norm as Dynamo Footwear began to repurchase outstanding stock in earnest. I believe by year 25, we probably would have begun to pay dividends again, but there would have only been about 10,000 shares outstanding at that point, so the cost would have been much lower to pay those dividends. And because Dynamo was actively repurchasing stock each year in order to increase our earnings per share and return on investment numbers, stock issues were never an option for us. Because our goal was to fund future expansion with current revenues, using debt or equity to finance those endeavors was not ideal. If needed, I preferred to use debt over equity because Dynamo's credit rating was so high, and avoiding increasing the shares on the market helped so many of our other performance measures. And Dynamo's high credit rating was one of the first metrics I focused on when we started the simulation, just in case we needed to borrow money for future expansion. In order to do this, we worked to pay down our existing loans on time, ensured that we expanded slow enough to cover the expense and not take on too much extra debt too early. And once the original loans were paid off, we continued to make a profit each year, even though some years were better than others. And that allowed Dynamo to always be a low risk for the banks. Our closest competitors. I would consider G Company and Integrity Shoe Company my two strongest competitors in both the internet and wholesale markets. Both companies offered fewer models on their product line than Dynamo, but they were at similar SQ ratings and only slightly higher prices. They both paid significantly more on search engine and brand advertising than I did, which helps explain their larger market shares. They also had higher image ratings, and both companies had celebrity endorsements. It is more difficult to pinpoint a private label competitor. I managed to control that market for the majority of the simulation because it seems like the other companies struggled to understand the value in private label production. However, Alpha Athletics realized the benefit of private label production and managed to take the remainder of the market share where I could not produce enough to meet private label demand. In addition, Human Shoes had a decent market share in some of the geographical regions toward the end of the simulation. In order to compete more effectively against G Company and Integrity Shoe Company, Dynamo Footwear will need to first and foremost increase our advertising spending. Compared to our two closest competitors, Dynamo is spending mere pennies on advertising. Also, changing the production mix to increase superior materials and styling features in our products will help increase our SQ rating and make our product more competitive. Finally, it may be time for Dynamo to consider bidding for a celebrity endorsement. This ties into increased advertising spending, but it really seems to be helping other companies. In order to compete, it might be time for Dynamo to make an offer. In the private label market, Dynamo still does not have much competition. However, expanding by building a factory in Europe will allow us to produce more private label pairs and swipe more of the market in that way. Other than expanding, Dynamo can maintain the status quo for now when it comes to private label production. The lessons I learned. I learned a lot while completing the business simulation game. I started with a plan and had to retailor it or fine-tune it a couple of times in order to ensure Dynamo stayed in the top half of the market. First, I learned that advertising expenses can make a huge difference in the success of a retail company. That seems like a common sense thing, but I've always been suspicious of marketing, and I wasn't really willing to throw a lot of money toward it in the simulation because I thought if we have a good product, is it really necessary? It's not, but if you want to really compete against the bigger companies, you can't do much without good advertising. How else will customers know about your product? Second, I learned that common stock, specifically outstanding shares of stock, can be both a gift and a curse. Shares of stock can help fund expansion or production efforts, and they can help you avoid the interest fees of bank loans. The flip side of that is that public companies have to decide what to do about dividends, how to explain when they aren't paying out dividends, and how to maintain high EPS and ROE numbers while juggling large numbers of outstanding shares. It made me really appreciate companies like Trader Joe's who remain private. Third, and related to my common stock point, I learned that a conservative financial plan can be good, but it can also really limit you. It was a great feeling knowing that Dynamo's outstanding shares were shrinking and we had paid back our loans, but it was really difficult to make the same kind of revenues when we only had 3 production facilities compared to many other companies' 4 production facilities. And I have no doubt that Dynamo would have caught up over time, but if this had been a real business, how many opportunities would we have missed because of our slower growth? And how many customers would be loyal to other companies and never consider buying us by the time Dynamo hit their market with any seriousness? The fourth and perhaps biggest lesson I learned was that management has to remain flexible in a competitive market. There's no real way to know how other companies are going to respond or react to market fluctuations. And that means that sometimes your plan is no longer going to work the way you thought that it would. So remaining flexible and being willing to recognize when the plan needs to change is super important. And finally, I learned that at the end of the day, management has to be true to themselves. This became the most obvious to me in my attempts to cut the corporate responsibility costs for Dynamo's workers. Several times during the first few years, I tried to cut expenses by not funding these measures because did my workers really need a cafeteria? Did we really need to use recycled packaging? Were energy initiatives really that important? But every time I tried to cut those costs, I felt like I had crossed an ethical line that I wasn't comfortable crossing. So I genuinely believe that ethical and environmentally conscious businesses are better for our environment, for our world, for our communities. And so I always added those costs back. I learned that it's important for managers to share the beliefs of their company and to act on those beliefs. And it's important for me moving forward to only work for companies who share those corporate responsibility and ethically responsibility and environmentally conscious beliefs. Otherwise, I'll never be happy there. Thank you so much for watching my presentation over Dynamo Footwear. Have a great day.